just talking about the not so Asian helicopter. Helicopter.
It's a joke. But
Helicopter.
another big rumour, that's all going around there, that it was also internal.
That what?
That they did it themselves. Khomeini did it himself.
Why?
To put his son in that position. Because his son now has that position.
Why does he have to kill himself?
Because there's no way he could have got rid of him.
They're crazy Muslims. So
There's no.
Я могу сам дотянуться.
I thought of it.
He's,
there were three-
he's 85, Khomeini.
I read there were 3 helicopters.
Not well.
There were 3 helicopters in the group. 2 of them landed safely,
Yeah.
and 1 crashed.
Thank you.
So a helicopter only got one out of 3.
But now is everybody waiting for the response? How they're going to respond?
No, they've done the response. Khomeini's
They
son
was
is now in
flying
his
on
position.
American helicopter, 40 years old, and they don't have a spare parts for the last
And they're
40
flying an
years.
American helicopter,
Yes,
Yeah.
Apache,
Yeah.
very old
not
one.
Russian.
No,
Yeah,
American.
they have bad parts
The
everywhere.
2 reached the destination. The another one, the old one, this American Apache,
Yeah.
where was, they didn't reach because it was some technical problem and was a very heavy fog. And what happened? He hit the hill, the mountain, head collision. Yeah, bam, gone.
That's what they told us.
That's what
That
they
is
said.
what was told by the Iranian, through the newspaper.
Yeah, that's what they told us, but they told everybody late.
But Armenians said that they claim that they put the bomb.
That's right.
So I saw the on X they said they haven't found his body. Basically, haven't found his body. But they said I saw a picture on X. They found his ring. This big ring was a special ring, and everybody was crying.
It blew the airplane.
But the ring,
Yeah, the finger fly away. What can you do? Thanks God it's fly away.
and I saw also.
Whatever it is, who did it, but it's a...
So this Sunday is Lag BaOmer. Lag BaOmer usually comes out in this week's Sedra, which is BEHAR. BEHAR means on the mountain. And it's the Yortzeit of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai is... Sorry, this will pass. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai is arguably the father of Kabbalah, and he is the most prolific of all the Tanoim, of all the first group of scholars in the Talmud, for the Mishnah. He's mentioned in every Mishnah, every single one. And he is the Talmud Chacham par excellence. He is the example of the absolute extreme of learning, to the point that it's said about him that Torosoi Umanosoi, which means that his Torah was his livelihood. At one point he spent 12 years in a cave with his son. They used to be buried in sand. Every Shabbos they'd come out of the sand and get dressed in Shabbos clothes. He didn't have to work, didn't have to earn any money, because there was a carob tree that grew outside the cave they were in, and there was a stream of water that was flowed down beside it. Some say miraculously. There are various opinions about that, but and he spent 12 years in this cave with his son, incessantly learning Torah, to the point that they came out 12 years later. He was appalled, and his son were appalled, that he couldn't understand how Jews were wasting their time doing things like growing crops and feeding animals and living ordinary mundane lives when they could be learning Torah. And Lag BaOmer, amongst other things, is his Yortzeit. It's the day on which he died. Jews celebrate this because it was his will, it was his tzavah, that he asked Am Yisrael on Lag BaOmer to be especially joyful. Why? Because we learn, and I'm sure we've had this before, that at Tzaddik, on his death, the good that he's done, elevating Gashmias into Ruchnias and bringing Ruchnias down into Gashmias, is revealed, and it becomes available for a Jew to attach to. So you get a situation, for example, in Eretz Yisrael, in Miron, where the Rashbi is Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai, he's called the Rashbi, where he is buried in Miron, and you ever were there, Lag BaOmer?
Yeah, but it's not going to be this year.
For security reasons, okay. I didn't know that, but usually there are a couple of 100,000 people there, and it's an amazing thing, and there are amazing stories about barren women being able to conceive, and lots of stories. I can't verify any of them, so I'm not going to do any of them, but just suffice it to know that as a tzaddik, as a leader of Am Yisrael, some say that he was the Gilgul, the reincarnation of Moshe Rabbeinu. There are many things which are not provable. One thing is for certain. He is the most frequently quoted Tana in the Mishnah. He is known as being a person who spent his entire existence learning Torah. And he is famous for a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, in which he explains that there are three crowns. There's the crown of Torah, there's the crown of Kahuna, being a Kohen, there's the crown of Malchus, of kingship, and then he goes on to say, but, and he now, sorry, he now adds a fourth crown and says, but the crown of the Keser Shem Tov, which means a crown of a good name, supersedes all of the other three. So the issue that the Rebbe addresses in the Sikha, and by the way, I better do it for the tape, it's in volume Yud Zayin, and it's on page 303. And for those with good memories, I see that I did it with the Shia in 1995. So if anyone can remember it well, you might want to take over the Shia. And I'm appalled that we haven't done it since 1995. So anyway, I'll try and repair that in the future with Lag BaOmers. You don't believe me? There.
No, yeah, this was another one.
This is 224.
Ah, today.
2000 today, so that I know for next time. Yeah.
Here, no. I just think I was here.
So what is the point of this Sikha? Let's go to the end of it first. The Rebbe is examining this, and it's a deep issue, not so much in understanding the words that I'm going to tell you, but making it part of one's own personal experience. What the Rebbe explains is that we are talking now about two massive extremes. There's one extreme where a Jew finds Kedusha, finds holiness, finds an experience with his God which is workable, personal and an energy of its own. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have the daily grind, the traffic jams and the difficulties and every, I don't have to explain to anybody, everybody has their special cocktail of brilliantly constructed problems every day that Hashem gives us. And we are expected to deal with those. And the question is, what is your mindset? What is my mindset when we experience both those two extremes? And you know, the Rebbe is brilliant at knitting these things together, and he points out that this Parsha, because everything in is Hashgacha Pratis, everything in Torah is exact. So if we're going to be learning Parshas Emoer at the time of BaOmer, it must be that there's something reflected in the Parsha for BaOmer, like with every other piece of Hashgacha Pratis. And the Rebbe points out that the Parshas Emoer starts out with the giving of the Torah and all the laws to do with Shemitah. Shemitah is where the land has to have a holiday every 7 years. It's a very difficult mitzvah for those people who live in Eretz Yisrael, because you have to understand what the emunah that you have to have, what the faith that a Jew has to have in this. If you can't use the land on the 7th year, it means that you need 3 years, because you can't touch the land on the 7th year. You've got to replant it on the 8th year, and then you can't get access to the food until the 9th year. So in the 6th year, a Jew, if he's an ordinary person with ordinary betochen, says, what are we going to eat next year? So you have at the beginning of the Sidra this highest level of emunah that the Torah requires from us, and it ends up where if a person is so impoverished, he can sell himself into service, and the lowest level of doing that is to sell yourself into service of a non-Jew, and lower than that even to an idolater. So the Rebbe says what is going on in the Sidra, it is illustrating the highest level of life down to the lowest level of life. And what this Sikha is about, I'm taking you to the end first so you know where the goalposts are. The Rebbe is explaining that the greatness of the Rashbi, of Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai, and the reason we revere him and learn him and celebrate his Yortzeit is that he is the physical manifestation available to all of us as an example of absolute dedication in learning, but at the same time, the crown that he espouses in the Mishnah is the crown of a Shem Tov, of a good name. What does it mean, a good name? Somebody who's honest, somebody who's a person of integrity, and a person who cares about other people in priority to himself. So that is the span that this has got, and I just want to add a detail in that so that you know where this is going. The span is covered by the following reality, that the big problem, when we talk about creation, we talk about your and my life, the 60, 70, 120 years that we live in this Gilgal. There are various levels that everybody knows. We've been through this often. There's the average schlepper in the street who never thinks about it, why he's alive and what he's supposed to be achieving. Then you get the person who thinks about it a bit, and then you get the person that is privileged to learn Torah and in general and Hasidus in particular, until he begins to find real meaning in his life and a real reason for him being alive. But underscoring all that journey is this fundamental issue. Is there or isn't there a notion of separateness? Now you have to understand this is a very deep and difficult problem, because we have a statement in Torah, Eino ed milvadoi, that there is nothing else but godliness. And we have a age-old tension in Jewish philosophy that goes like this. What happened Sheshis Yimei Bereshis? What happened on the 6 days of creation? Did God do anything or didn't he do anything? Did he create the world or not? If he did create the world, how can you now say that there's Eino ed milvadoi? There's nothing else but godliness. And if he didn't create the world and having something apart from godliness, then you have to say that the Torah is lying. So either the Torah is lying, or and there was no, and it is Eino ed milvadoi, there is nothing but godliness, or you have to say that the Torah isn't lying, and Hashem created the heavens and the earth and the sky and the animals, and that is the notion of separateness. So much of Hasidus resolves that tension. Much of Hasidus deals with the injunction on a Jew to beat that tension, and for a Jew to be able to live with one leg in both camps, and it not to be a contradiction. Now, that's a big ask, because if you and I, we're born hardwired to feel that separateness. A child feels separate from his parents. A child growing up feels, all the child cares about is the child. He's totally self-involved, totally selfish, totally committed to whatever form of gratification he can get, and totally adverse to whatever level of repulsion there is for that. So we don't need to discuss that. Everybody understands that. So what is this child seeing himself as? Totally separate. Totally separate even from his parents, let alone his friends and let alone God. And yet, the goal, explains the Rebbe in this Sikha, is to follow Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. That is why this is his Yortzeit. What it is that we are celebrating on this Yortzeit is his ability to span those two poles. One pole was that he learned that it was Torosoi or Monosoi, that means his actual life, his income, his sustenance was only Torah, and yet at the same time he was able to be sufficiently involved in the world that he could leave us the legacy of understanding what happens in 2 weeks' time, or whatever. We can't count the BaOmer exactly, but in a couple of weeks' time, where we have Shavuos, where we get the Torah. So our getting the Torah, as we will see, I'll try and do a share on it next week, we'll see next week that the whole point of Matan Torah was that there was a change in creation. The world changed in essence. It's the biggest Kiddush since actual creation, and that there was introduced into what happened at Matan Torah was there was introduced the ability for Gashmias to influence Ruchnias and Ruchnias to be brought into Gashmias. And we'll get there for Shavuos next week. But in the meantime, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai is the personification of the person that is able to bridge the two polar opposites of spirituality and physicality. And you should know that most people, it's explained in, the Rebbe explains in this sikha, that most people have a penchant for one side or the other. It's trite to say that most of the 8.5 billion nefashos on this planet function in terms of pure gashmias. Then there's a small body of aesthetes who sit on mountains with their legs crossed and smoke whatever they're smoking, and they have nothing to do with gashmias. And then in between there's this whole raft of humanity where we live with a different combination, each one of us different to the other, of some Torah and some mitzvahs, some Torah and some reshuts, not mitzvahs, where you're doing things that aren't a mitzvah, something physical, cleaning your teeth. So we spend our lives doing mundane is the word I'm looking for. There are mundane things. And then there's the mitzvah system, and then ultimately there's learning Torah. And most of us take a place in that dynamic, and the danger is that you find that place and want to stay there, because that's it. We're taught that we are unlike Malachim, unlike angels, who are what are called oimdim. They stand still and worship Hashem in the way that they do and do Hashem's work the way they do. But we are mahalchim, that we have to move, and you have to move, and you have to grow, and you have to. And what was good enough yesterday isn't good enough today, and what was good enough last year isn't good enough this year. And one of the great dangers in a Jew's spiritual progress is that he reaches a certain level, congratulates himself, probably rightly, on reaching that level, and then says, okay, that's enough. I'm not a fanatic, I'm not a rabbi, so this is pretty good. And compared to what I was yesterday, I'm doing great. And that may be true, but it's no excuse for stopping there. So this dynamic is introduced by Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, that on the one hand, he spent 12 years with his son in a cave learning Torah, nothing but Torah, went out for 1 year, saw that what was going on, says that people were burned up in their glare because they were so powerful. They went back into the cave for another year and learned how to be able to tolerate others who were not at their Torah learning level. Now, just because someone isn't at your Torah learning level doesn't mean that they're not doing better than you elsewhere, in the mitzvah level. And one of the biggest problems in dealing with this spectrum of where you stand with this notion of separateness, and it's a notion of separateness from your God. That's the problem, because, okay, on Yom Kippur, at a certain point of time in Ne'ilah, most people don't feel very separate from God. They feel very connected. But what about the rest of the time? What about every day? What about when you get up in the morning and you're getting the news, or you're having your egg for breakfast, or where is your connection to your God then? And for most people, that's a moving target, and for most people, it's not a very common experience to identify that oneness. So Reb Shimon Bar Yochai comes along to say that although Kesed Torah is one of the top crown, at the end of the day, the fourth crown of Ma'asim Tovim, of good deeds, trumps it. It supersedes it. So on Lag BaOmer, we are encouraged to get a spiritual lift from the fact that it's the Rashbi's Yortzeit, and that spiritual lift is in the area of examining your and my personal feeling of independence from our God. And you should know that that feeling of independence is a clipper. That feeling of independence is wrong. It's bad. And if you've got any sense, you lasso Hashem into this blame, and you say, well, it's partly your fault, because you've given me Gashmias all day. I mean, I've got to earn a living. I've got to get to the office. I've got to get home. I've got to get my kids' teeth fixed. I've got to plan their wedding, which I can't afford. Do all the things that we do that are such a problem for us. And that takes up a lot of time. And worse than time, it takes up a lot of focus. And it's this issue of focus that is the legacy of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. It's this legacy of focus on the fact that even though it feels as though we're separate, that's a perspective that can be changed. We learn in Chabad Hasidus that perspectives are levushim, they're garments. Just to revise quickly, the soul has 10 what's called koiches, 3 intellectual, 7 emotional, 10 powers. And you're born hardwired with those 10 koiches. To each person, it's different. Some people are cleverer, some people are less clever, some people are sharper, some people are more blunt, some people are tall, some people are short. You know the whole story. So of those 10 levels, there's a big infinite variation. And we can't change those levels. We're born with those levels, unless you're at tzaddik. A tzaddik can do it. That's for another share. But ordinary people are hardwired like this. Now, what happens if you're hardwired that you're lazy? You don't like to learn Torah. There's some people that love to learn Torah. There's a famous story of the Tzemach Tzedek, that a chassid goes to the Tzemach Tzedek and wants a tikkun, goes for Yechidus. And he says to the Tzemach Tzedek, I need a tikkun, Rebbe. I hate learning. I hate it. And you know what the Tzemach Tzedek said to him? He said, I'm jealous of you. I'm so jealous of you. He says, why? He says, I love learning. So I love it so much, I like it more than anything. So I never know if I'm learning because of the mitzvah or because of the gratification that it gives me. So everybody's different. Some people love learning, some people hate learning. Does it mean that if you hate learning, you shouldn't learn? Chas v'sholom. A Jew's got to learn. Does it mean if you love learning, you have to learn all the time and not do mitzvahs? Chas v'sholom. A Jew's got to do mitzvahs. The halacha is that if there's a mitzvah that can't be done by somebody else, you have to interrupt learning to do the mitzvah. So, and we have the example of the two Shvatim, of the two tribes of Yisachar and Zvulun, where they made a partnership. and you have to listen to the Rebbe's brilliance in this. Everybody's always talked about this partnership. One of them went out on ships to earn money, and the other one sat and learned. And the partnership was that the one who earned money would support the one who learned, and therefore would get a benefit from their learning, and the one who learned would get a benefit from the tzedakah they gave. So the Rebbe says, what, you really think that one of the tribes didn't do any learning and one of the tribes didn't do any business? They had to do some business and they had to do some learning. So the question is, how much? Where do you put yourself in the scale? Where do you grade yourself in this range of Torah and mitzvahs? So let's go back to perspective. Sorry, I got waylaid. We're hardwired with our neshama, with our nefesh habamis, but we have three sets of garments: thought, speech, and action. And those we are not hardwired with. It says that those are three levushim, three garments that we have absolute control over. Now, you've got to get this right, because it's one of the deepest mistakes that people make when they say, I couldn't help it. I just couldn't help it. We say, you can help it. We say that if you're hardwired for something negative, Hashem would not have given you that negative if he didn't give you the garment to change that negative. So the example that's usually used is if a man is born stingy, hates giving tzedakah, can't give it away, can't. It's like tearing off flesh. So the answer to that is, so what? You still got to give tzedakah. Are you hated? Okay, you're doing great if you can overcome that. How do you overcome it? You can't unhardwire yourself, but what you can do is you can bring your thought, speech, and action to play, and you can understand that you've got an obligation to give tzedakah. That's learning Torah. You've got to give tzedakah, so then you make a decision to give tzedakah, and then you actually give it. So the thought, speech, and action ends up performing the mitzvah. Doesn't matter that you are hardwired that you didn't like the mitzvah, so what? Now, a subtle version of that is what I'm going to try and share with you in terms of perspective. Because with everything, it depends where you look. It's like a diamond. The diamond has many facets, right? So it depends which facet is catching the light. It's all the one diamond, but it depends which facet is catching the light. And we learn this deep truth in Hasidus, that for a spiritually mature Jew, he has the power to adjust that perspective. Is it easy? Not easy. Very difficult. But that doesn't mean that you can't do it. And when you do it, you have paradise. You enter your Eretz Yisrael. How do we know this? We have a famous BaOmer from Parashat Shlach, where the Rebbe explains this, and we've been through this many times in this year, but for completeness, let's do it. That when Am Yisrael were told to go into Eretz Canaan and conquer it, and make from it a land, the land of Eretz Yisrael, the geographical boundaries of Eretz Canaan and Eretz Yisrael are exactly the same. The Eretz Canaan was inhabited by 7 nations, and those 7 nations are equivalent to the hardwired 7 levels of emotion. And the concept of conquering that is the concept of a Jew exercising control over his levushim, the thought, speech, and action, in order to dominate and to control and direct those emotions for good. And when he does that, he has Eretz Yisrael, not Eretz Canaan. He has personal paradise. In fact, it's described by one of the Rebbeim as living compared to existing. And all of this we have from Reb Shimon Bar Yochai and on Lag BaOmer. So for us, it's a very important day. So let me take you through a change of perspective to show you how, although it may be difficult, it's available, and it's only a question of effort to find it. Let me take an absurd example. There's a Farbrengen in which the Rebbe asks an unbelievable question. In Gemara Brachas, it says that Hashem, since Torah is Hashem's wisdom, obviously, since it's his wisdom, he keeps it. It's counterintuitive to imagine that Hashem wouldn't keep his own Torah. So, if he keeps his own Torah, what about when it appears that he doesn't? So the Rebbe gives an example. We have a halakha. I'm sure I've done this before, but I've often done it in Farbrengen, so maybe I haven't done it here. We have a halakha that goes like this, that you're not allowed to put a mikshul, a stumbling block, before the blind. You know that's a forbidden, that's a halakha. So the Rebbe says, well, God keeps his Torah. So what do you have to say, God? You send a neshama down into a guf for 60, 70, 120 years, and you surround him with tests and difficulties and challenges and temptations, and he's going to fail. Why aren't you putting a stumbling block before the blind? Now let's understand what this means, a stumbling block. I'll give you an example from my life, or who cares, Kremnizer's life, but there was a time 100 years ago when I used to be a useful poker player. Now I don't know how many of you guys play poker, but for those who understand the game, it has very little to do with luck. Poker has to do with luck on one night, but it doesn't have to do with luck on over a period of time. Why? Because it's a game of judgment. What's the judgment? There are three factors in poker. There's obviously the quality of your hand, but that's only 1/3. The second factor is the amount of the pot, and the third factor is the price of the bet. And poker is a judgment of those three factors. So let me give you let's say you've got a fantastic hand, and the pot is a penny, a cent, and the bet is $1 million, you're a fool to play, even if you've got an unimaginably good hand. On the other hand, if a man has an average hand and the pot is huge and the bet is cheap, a good poker player will always play. So it's a judgment between those three things. Now, we used to have a regular poker game. And the guy who ran that poker game one day rang up and said, look, we've got a guy coming from Adelaide. He's a champion player, but he's very good. Do you want to play? And everybody wanted to play because it's good to play with someone good. You know, it's like tennis. The better the your opponent, providing it's a fair match. You know, otherwise it becomes useless. So everybody fancied themselves a bit as poker players, and this guy's supposed to be so good. So yes, sure, we want to play. So we all go to his house, and because real poker players understand that it's not luck, it's judgment, you wouldn't get people in a serious poker game like in the movies drinking whiskey. Who would drink? Why would you drink alcohol when you need your judgment to be fractionally correct, right? So anybody who drinks and plays high stakes poker is an idiot. There's no, unless he has the one lucky light of his light, he's going to lose. So we come there to the house, and sitting on the table is a bottle of $300 Glenlivet. I don't know, 50-year-old whiskey. I can't remember what it was. And everybody looks at this whiskey and can't believe it. Anyway, we start playing. The guy from Adelaide takes the cup. He says, "Anyone drinking?" And my host says, "Go ahead." So he takes a drink, and then another, and another, and another. To cut a long story short, he loses a fortune that night. I don't know if he could afford to lose it, but he lost a huge amount of money. A week later, I'm in Double Bay, and I meet this guy. His name was John. And I said, "John, what was that all about? The thing?" He said, "The guy from Adelaide is a recovering alcoholic." And I said, "But how could you do that?" He said, "What did I do? I didn't do it. I didn't tell him to drink. He wanted to drink. I put the bottle on the table. After that, it was up to him. If he wants to choose to drink the whiskey, what's it to do with me?" Right? It's absolutely forbidden, right? Because it's a stumbling block before the blind. So, and I had a huge problem with this because I won a lot of money that night, and I had to go to my mashpir and ask him what I had to do with it, and do I try and give the money back, or on the other hand, he lost the money, and then I exposed the other people. And anyway, there's a whole gun samasa with it, and most of it ended up going in tzedakah. But that's not the point. The point is that is a stumbling block before the blind, right? Okay, so the Rebbe asks this question on God. He says, "How can you do that? How can you send a neshama down into a guf for 60, 70, 100 years and expect him not to drink the whiskey? It's on the table, right?" So listen to what the Rebbe explains. He explains why isn't Hashem guilty of putting a stumbling block before the blind? Because when you and I put a stumbling block before the blind, that person suffers damage. That guy who lost the money suffered damage. What was John's avera? That he put a stumbling block before him, the whiskey before a recovering alcoholic, and the result was that the guy suffered damage. But when Hashem puts a stumbling block before us, it's not putting a stumbling block before the blind. It is it is giving you and me, if we fail, capital for tshuva. Capital in our bank account for tshuva. You understand that? So not only is Hashem not harming us, not only do we not have a damage, but with that action we have two gifts, and they're in the alternative. One gift is that you don't give in, you don't stumble, you don't drink the whiskey. But if you do, then you have in your spiritual bank account, you have the opportunity to do tshuva, and that tshuva takes you to a higher place than you were before you did the avera. Now, is that difficult? It's difficult. Is it difficult to acclimatize as your and my perspective? It is. It needs a Rebbe and a Fabringen to explain this. But it must be clear to everybody that if your perspective is able to find the good in what is happening to you all the time, you have a different life. And what the Rashbi's position was that all of his Torah became available for Gashmias. All of his Torah became an opportunity to set new perspectives on everything that was happening. And what are those perspectives really? Those perspectives really are that what am I doing here?
Everything is correct. Yeah.
All of those perspectives are an adjustment to this notion of separateness. That take the ordinary guy who is asked that question, or even if he's not asked the question, he comes to that conclusion himself. He says, there was a tsunami, I mean, there's plenty of evil in the world. There was a tsunami, there was a Holocaust, there was Israel's current position. So, where's God? There is no God. I feel separate. The feeling of separateness is the concept of blame makes you feel separate. It's natural. Comes the Rashbi, and what the Rebbe is explaining is that the journey, the personal climb up the personal mountain, is to find that there is no separateness. There is no separateness. There's only a separateness, an illusion of separateness. There is an illusion of, now what about real pain? What about real suffering? Can you excuse real pain and real suffering? By the way, you can't, when your friend is suffering, you can't lecture him on this stuff. You put your arm around him and help him. You give him a hug, or you give him some money, or you do whatever you have to do to help him. But when it's happening to yourself, this is the journey. The journey is to understand that there isn't a separateness. We are a Helik Elohikam Mimal. We are part of God's. Our neshama shares a common consciousness with our God. And the question is, how much time do you spend with him? Do you spend time with him when you're davening? Very nice. First of all, that's pretty difficult because most people daven by rote.
And they go too fast.
They go too fast, and on most days it's not fast enough for most of us. I mean, so, but what about the rest of the time? What about when and there are obvious times when you're going to spend time with your God. You're at a funeral, God forbid, or your daughter's wedding, in Mirz Hashem, or granddaughter's wedding, or whatever it is. There are times when the occasion manifests the closeness. But that's not the game. That's not a Jew's game. The Jew's game is to find that closeness in everything. In breakfast, in putting on your shoes, in making the decision of whether or not your pajamas are too dirty to wear tonight and should be washed, or you can wear them another night. Big decisions. Bringing the paper in. Whether you should raise your voice to your child or your wife or your spouse, or, if you're schizophrenic enough to have a pretending person right next to you, your God, your behavior is going to be different. And not only is your behavior different, your perspectives are different. Now, it's a difficult, so the answer is, you should feel together all day. Should feel from the moment we wake up in the morning until the moment we go to sleep at night, we want to feel one with our God and no sense of separation. That would be wonderful. That was the Rashbi's position. That's exactly what his position was. For ordinary people, that's not really going to happen for most people. So the question then becomes, what are your ratios? And those ratios can be as small as you like to begin with, and can be in as small as you like increments, whatever you can handle, but they need to be increments. We can't sit here next year at the next Lag BaOmer in 2025, and Mirz Hashem, we're all going to be as healthy and not look as though we're a day older, and not have grown in the year. And what does it mean, grown? It means establishing an increase in the connection between you and your God to the point that you feel less separate. Because the feeling of separateness is the clipper. Even though the whole Kiddush of creation was to create the notion of separateness. Because before creation, there was no notion of separateness. Right? There was only godliness. So what was the big Hiddish in creation? The very fact that there is a consciousness of separateness. And that is the very thing we've got to overcome. And not only have we got to overcome it, but we've got to elevate that which is causing us to feel the separateness. I know this sounds very theoretical, but it's the ability, or it's the constant task on a daily basis of trying to eliminate to a little bit more of a degree the concept that you hold yourself to be unique and not part of God, and not share a common consciousness with your God. And this is the bracha that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai gives on this Yortzeit and makes available to every Jew who wants it. Now, first of all, most people don't know about it, what we're talking about. They don't know any of this. Sure, there are more spiritual people who instinctively feel that some of this is, but to learn it properly, the way the Rebbe teaches it in this sikha, it's a discipline. It's a private, mental, physical, psychological, spiritual discipline. And the answer, and by overcoming it, you have Eretz Yisrael, not Eretz Canaan. You have a different life. You have living instead of existing. So comes Tuesday, Sunday. You'll go to a bonfire, maybe, God willing, and say l'chaim a bit more than usual. But you've got to remember that this is really the blueprint to our lifeblood. So l'chaim.
Robert, I've got a question.
Yes.
In relation to your poker experience,
Poker.
obliged to give 10% of whatever the...
Yes.
How does it apply to poker?
Everything.
Poker reading.
Everything.
But it's a gambling.
So what?
It's not a game?
You mean, are you allowed to gamble up here, Locke?
Yes.
That's a different question altogether.
Yeah, but